Betrayal doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it comes when your own stepson looks you in the eye and says, "If you don't leave this house, I'll destroy your life." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't even react. I just looked at him. 26 years old. Strong. Confident. Standing in my living room like he owned it. And my wife. She was standing right behind him. Silent. That silence told me everything. I had been in that house for 11 years. Paid the bills. Fixed the roof. Paid his college tuition. Took him to the hospital at 2 a.m. when he crashed his car. Sat beside him when his real father never showed up. And now he was telling me to leave. Not asking. Not discussing. Threatening. His jaw was tight. His eyes were cold. "You heard me," he said. "This is my mother's house. You're not family. You're just in the way." I slowly turned my head toward my wife. I waited. She didn't defend me. She didn't correct him. She didn't even look uncomfortable. She just said, "Maybe it's best if you give him space." That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not angry. Not broken. Just clear. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I understood. I saw it then. The shift. The alliance. They had already decided, and I was the obstacle. I smiled slightly. Not for them. For myself. Because when people think you are weak, they get careless. And careless people make mistakes. He took a step closer. Invading my space. Lowered his voice. "You don't get it," he said. "I can make things very hard for you. My mom will back me. Always." He was right about one thing. She didn't move. She didn't interrupt. She didn't protect. She just watched. Like a stranger. Like a witness. Not like a wife. I had married her when he was 15. Angry. Closed. Distant. I stayed patient. I stayed kind. I never tried to replace his father. I just tried to be steady. And now, he was using her against me. That's a special kind of betrayal. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't scream. It settles. I looked at him and said calmly, "You don't need to threaten me. I'm not your enemy." He laughed. Short, sharp, disrespectful. "You're not anything," he said. "That's the problem." My wife finally spoke. "He's just stressed," she said. "You know how he is." She said it like an excuse. Like I was supposed to understand. That was the second betrayal. The first was his threat. The second was her loyalty. I nodded again. Still calm. Still steady. But inside, I started counting. Counting days. Counting moves. Counting silence. Because men like him don't fear anger. They fear exposure. And women like her don't fear arguments. They fear consequences. I picked up my keys. Not in defeat. In preparation. As I walked toward the door, he said something that told me exactly who he had become. "Don't worry," he said. "You won't be missed." I stopped. Turned. And smiled. A small one. Controlled. He frowned. My wife looked confused. They thought the smile meant surrender. It didn't. It meant decision. I looked at her and said gently, "I hope you're ready for what comes next." She blinked. "What do you mean?" I shook my head. "Nothing," I said. "Just thinking out loud." And I walked out. No drama. No scene. Just silence. Because the strongest revenge doesn't start with a fight. It starts with space. And they had just given me plenty of it. Injustice didn't start when he threatened me. It started the day I married his mother and mistook his politeness for acceptance. I met her in a quiet grocery store aisle. Nothing dramatic. Nothing romantic. Just two tired adults reaching for the same box of cereal. She smiled. I smiled. We talked. That was it. She had soft eyes. A careful voice. She told me she was divorced. One son. Teenager. Difficult, but a good boy. People always say that. I was 52 at the time. Widowed. Set in my ways. I wasn't looking for excitement. I was looking for peace. She seemed like peace. We dated slowly. Coffee. Walks. Simple dinners. When she introduced me to her son, he stood up, shook my hand, looked me in the eye. "Nice to meet you," he said. Polite. Controlled. Smiling. I thought that meant respect. I was wrong. I moved in a year later. Not because I needed to. Because she asked. Her house. Her rules. Her son. I adjusted. Always. He was 15. Already tall. Already confident. Already used to getting his way. If he wanted something, she made it happen. If he failed a class, the teacher was unfair. If he got in trouble, the school was targeting him. If he broke something, it was an accident. She defended him like a lawyer. I noticed. I said nothing. Because when you marry a woman with a son, you don't criticize the son. You observe. And I observed everything. He never said thank you. Never cleaned up. Never apologized. He didn't need to. She did it for him. I paid the mortgage. Paid the utilities. Paid the insurance. She paid attention to him. He learned early. Money came from me. Loyalty came from her. That's a dangerous combination. He was charming in public. Teachers liked him. Neighbors praised him. Friends' parents trusted him. But at home, he ruled. He chose the TV. He chose the music. He chose the mood. If he was unhappy, the house was unhappy. If he was angry, everyone walked carefully. He'd drop comments. Small ones. Sharp ones. "This isn't your house. She's my mom. You don't understand our family." Never directly. Always with a smile. Manipulation is never loud. It's strategic. I tried to connect. Took him fishing. Tried sports. Tried conversations. He played along. Just enough. Enough to keep his mother comfortable. Not enough to build anything real. When he was 17, he crashed his car. Totaled it. She cried. He sulked. I paid. He didn't thank me. He just said, "When can I get another one?" She looked at me. I nodded. That was my mistake. Every time I fixed something, I trained him. Every time I stayed silent, I taught him. He learned that I was stable. And stability is easy to exploit. When he went to college, she panicked. He wanted money. She wanted him happy. I provided. Tuition. Apartment. Spending money. He called when he needed something. Never when he didn't. If I suggested responsibility, she corrected me. Don't pressure him. He's sensitive. He's finding himself. I stopped trying. Not out of anger. Out of understanding. Some battles are unwinnable. He came back at 24. No degree. No plan. Moved into the house like he owned it. Changed the furniture. Changed the rules. Changed the tone. I became invisible. If I spoke, he ignored. If I insisted, she softened it. Just let him be. That phrase destroyed more than she realized. Because let him be slowly became let him rule. And rule he did. He used her emotions. Used her guilt. Used her fear of losing him. And she let him. Because mothers like her don't see manipulation. They see need. And men like him use that. By 26, he wasn't a son. He was a presence. Heavy. Demanding. Untouchable. I was just the man who paid. Nothing more. Nothing less. He didn't respect me. He didn't fear me. He didn't even acknowledge me. I was furniture. And furniture is easy to remove. A month before the confrontation, something changed. Small things. He stopped saying hello. Stopped answering when I spoke. Stopped pretending. He walked past me like I wasn't there. He spoke to his mother in front of me like I didn't exist. Plans were made without me. Decisions were taken without me. I felt the space. I didn't fill it. Because men who rush to be included usually get excluded harder. I watched. Listened. Waited. He whispered more. She nodded more. He complained. She comforted. He suggested. She agreed. I became the background, the support, the resource, not the partner. That's when I knew something was coming. You don't need anger to feel danger. You just need awareness. And I was very aware. She stopped asking my opinion. Stopped sharing her day. Stopped sitting next to me. Not suddenly. Gradually. Like erosion. Quiet. Slow. Certain. He sat where I used to sit. Spoke where I used to speak. Controlled where I used to lead. I didn't compete. Because men who compete with boys lose dignity. And I wasn't going to lose mine. I became calm. Quiet. Observant. And that made him bolder. Because spoiled men mistake silence for weakness. And manipulative men mistake patience for permission. He was both. Segment 6. The calm before the storm. The house changed. Not physically. Emotionally. It felt colder. Sharper. Tighter. I was no longer included. I was tolerated. And tolerance is the first step toward removal. She didn't see it. Or didn't want to. He did. And he liked it. He was building something. Position. Control. Authority. And I was in the way. I didn't confront. I prepared. Because when someone starts moving pieces quietly, you don't flip the board. You let them think they're winning. And he thought he was. Betrayal doesn't always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it slips in quietly while you're still paying for everything. The first thing he took was the kitchen. Not physically. Socially. He started cooking at odd hours. Late nights. Early mornings. Always when I was there. Not to share. To control. If I made coffee, he'd comment. You're using too much. That brand is cheap. Mom doesn't like it that way. She never corrected him. She adjusted. That's how it begins. Small adjustments. Then bigger ones. He changed the Wi-Fi password. Said it was for security. I asked why. He smiled. You wouldn't understand. She laughed. He won. I stopped asking. Not because I agreed. Because I was studying. He started bringing friends over without asking. Loud. Careless. Disrespectful. They ignored me. He didn't introduce me. I was a shadow in my own home. When I mentioned it, she said, "He's young. Don't be so sensitive." Sensitive. That word. It's how people justify disrespect. He started parking in my spot. Using my tools. Borrowing my things. Never returning them. Never asking. I didn't confront. I observed. Because spoiled men get power from reaction. I wasn't giving him that. He began interrupting me when I spoke. Not aggressively. Casually. Like my words didn't matter. If I said something to her, he'd respond for her. If I asked a question, he'd answer. She let him. That's when I knew. This wasn't just disrespect. This was positioning. He was placing himself between us. And she was allowing it. Because to her, he wasn't competing. He was protecting. That's how manipulative sons survive. They disguise control as concern. He didn't ask anymore. He instructed. Don't forget my appointment. Make sure dinner's ready. Why is the house like this? She complied, smiled, nodded, like a servant. And she didn't see it, because she called it love. I watched the dynamic shift. Slow, deliberate. He wasn't rushing. He was replacing. And I was being erased. We were at a family dinner. Her sister. Her brother-in-law. He told a story. I corrected a detail. Gently. He looked at me and said, "Don't interrupt when adults are talking." The table went silent. She didn't defend me. She laughed. He smirked. That moment burned. Not because of the insult. Because of the permission. She had just given him permission. To disrespect. To dominate. To dismiss. And he accepted it. Happily. He started asking her for money. Large amounts. She came to me. "Can you help? He needs it." I always did. He never asked me directly. Never thanked me. He just took. And she delivered. Like a messenger. That's when I stopped feeling like a husband. And started feeling like a sponsor. There's a difference. And it's humiliating. They started going out without me. Dinners. Movies. Events. I'd find out later. "Oh, we didn't think you'd be interested. We didn't want you there." I didn't argue. I didn't complain. Because I was done asking for space in a house I paid for. Instead, I gave them space. And watched what they did with it. He began using emotional language. "Mom, he doesn't really care about us. He's always cold. He doesn't understand our bond." I heard it once. Through the hallway. She replied, "I know, baby. I know, baby." At 26, I stood still. Not shocked. Just clear. That's when I stopped hoping. And started planning. Because hope is for people who believe. Planning is for people who know. And I knew. The day he tested me. He left the front door open. All night. In winter. I closed it. In the morning, he confronted me. "Don't touch my things," I said calmly. "It's my house too." He laughed. Looked at his mother. She said nothing. That was the test. And I failed it. Not by reacting. By staying. Because staying told him I would tolerate. And spoiled men grow bold on tolerance. The power shift was complete. By then, he controlled the mood of the house. If he was angry, she was anxious. If he was happy, she was relieved. I was irrelevant. A background figure. A wallet. A convenience. And he knew it. He enjoyed it. He started making comments. "You should be grateful she married you. You're lucky she puts up with you. You'd be alone without us." I didn't respond. But inside, I was already gone. The night she chose him. We argued. Not loudly. Quietly. I said, "I feel like I don't exist here." She sighed. "He's my son." I nodded. "I know." That was it. That was the answer. Not discussion. Not compromise. Just declaration. And I respected it. Because when someone shows you their priority, you believe them. And I did. The calm withdrawal. I stopped engaging. Stopped correcting. Stopped trying. Not out of bitterness. Out of clarity. I was no longer part of the family. I was the structure. And structures don't get thanked. They get used. So I became very still. Very quiet. Very observant. And very prepared. Because when you are pushed out slowly, you don't stumble. You step back. And watch who falls. The look he gave me. One evening, he looked at me. Long. Measured. Not hostile. Evaluating. like a man checking the weight of a door. That look told me everything. He wasn't wondering if he could push me out. He was deciding when and how. I met his eyes. Didn't flinch. Didn't smile. Just calm. He looked away. But his jaw tightened. He had just realized something. I wasn't afraid. And men like him, they don't know what to do with that. The silence between us grew. We stopped speaking. Not because of anger. Because of strategy. He was positioning. I was preparing. She was pretending. And the house was holding its breath. Because when power shifts quietly, the explosion is always delayed. But it always comes. The real betrayal wasn't when he threatened me. It was when I realized my own wife had already agreed with him. The house didn't feel shared anymore. It felt occupied. He moved freely. I moved carefully. He spoke. I listened. He decided. She supported. And I adjusted. That's how it became normal. Not suddenly. Naturally. Like water rising. 1 inch at a time. Until you're drowning and don't know when it happened. He started controlling her schedule. Don't forget my lunch. Cancel your plans. Stay home tonight. She obeyed. Not because he forced her. Because he expected it. And expectation is powerful. I watched a woman who once laughed with me now seek approval from him. Before speaking. Before choosing. Before moving. That's when I knew he had replaced me. Not as a husband. As the center. And centers are dangerous. Because everything bends around them. Including loyalty. He began using her emotions like tools. If she disagreed, he withdrew. If she questioned, he sulked. If she hesitated, he accused. You don't care about me. I'm all alone. I guess I don't matter. And she folded. Every time. He learned quickly. Tears worked. Silence worked. Guilt worked best. And I became the target. Not directly. Indirectly. Mom, he doesn't understand us. He judges me. He doesn't want me here. She'd look at me. Searching. And I'd nod. Because defending yourself against lies only feeds them. And I wasn't feeding him. I was watching him. He started rearranging things. My chair. My shelf. My side of the closet. Small changes. Symbolic ones. He didn't ask. He just did. She didn't question. She just accepted. And I saw the message. This isn't yours anymore. So I stopped claiming it. Because when someone wants to take, you let them think they've already won. That's when they stop guarding. One evening, he invited people over. Didn't tell me. Didn't ask. They filled the house. Noise. Laughter. Music. I stood in the hallway. Invisible. He didn't introduce me. Didn't acknowledge me. I was a stranger in my own home. And she smiled. Hosted. Pretended. That was the first night I ate alone. In the bedroom. With the door closed. Not because I was hurt. Because I was done. He began criticizing me openly. My clothes. My food. My routines. Always in front of her. Always casually. Always without consequence. You're old-fashioned. You're boring. You're stuck. She laughed. Lightly. Nervously. Never defensively. And that told me more than words ever could. Because silence in the face of disrespect is approval. And she approved. He used her as a shield. If I looked at him, he'd look at her. If I spoke, he'd turn to her. If I reacted, he'd say, Mom, see how he is? And she'd calm him. Not me. Never me. He had her. And he knew it. And that gave him courage. Dangerous courage. The kind that grows teeth. The financial side tightened. He wanted more. She asked me. Always through her. Never directly. He didn't respect me enough to ask. He expected her to demand. And she did. Just this once. He really needs it. Don't make this difficult. That last line stayed with me. Don't make this difficult. Meaning, don't interfere. Don't challenge. Don't exist. So I didn't. I transferred, paid, covered, and became more invisible. He started making decisions about the house. Repairs, decor, changes. I wasn't consulted. She'd tell me after. Oh, he thought it would be better. Better for who? Not me. But I didn't ask. Because I already knew. Better for him. Always. Then came the emotional isolation. She stopped sharing her thoughts, her worries, her plans. Conversations became practical, cold, short. He filled the space. Not physically, emotionally. He became her first call, her first concern, her first priority. And I became background noise. Useful, replaceable, temporary. That's how it felt. And feelings usually arrive before facts. One night, I heard them talking. Low voices. Serious tone. I wasn't meant to hear. But I did. He doesn't belong here, he said. She didn't reply immediately. And that pause was everything. Then she said, "He's been good to us." He replied, "So." No anger. No emotion. Just calculation. And she didn't argue. She sighed and said, "I know." That was the moment. Not the threat. Not the confrontation. That moment. Because that's when I knew. They were discussing me. Not with me. About me. Like an object. Like a problem. Like something to remove. I didn't confront. I didn't react. I didn't reveal. I returned to the bedroom, sat on the bed, and smiled. Not out of joy, out of clarity. Because when people show you their plans, you believe them. And I believed them. From that day, I changed. Subtly. I spoke less. Observed more. I kept records. Notes. Dates. Amounts. Patterns. Not emotionally. Logically. Because men who plan emotionally get sloppy. Men who plan quietly get precise. And I was becoming very precise. He noticed. I could tell. He watched me more. Measured me. Evaluated. Not with fear. With curiosity. Like a predator sensing something shift. And that made him uneasy. Because he expected submission. Not silence. She grew colder. Distant. Preoccupied. She no longer asked how I was. She no longer cared. And I no longer needed her to. Because once loyalty is gone, so is obligation. And I was freeing myself. One calm moment at a time. He started pushing limits. Using my things without asking. Entering my space. Commenting on my habits. He was testing. Seeing how far he could go. And I let him. Because every test is information. And he was giving me plenty. Then came the week before the threat. He stopped pretending completely. No greetings. No courtesy. No filters. He walked past me like air. Spoke over me. Ignored me. She didn't intervene. Didn't notice. Didn't care. And I realized something. I was already gone. They just hadn't told me yet. That's when I began preparing. Not emotionally. Logistically. Quietly. I moved things. Organized documents. Secured accounts. Separated access. Not to leave. To control. Because control doesn't come from shouting. It comes from positioning. And I was positioning myself. He sensed it. I saw it in his eyes. That calculating look. the one that measures risk. He knew something was different, but he couldn't identify it, because calm men confuse aggressive ones. And he was aggressive, just in a soft way. She asked me one night, "Are you okay?" I looked at her, really looked, and said, "I'm fine." And I was. Because I had stopped expecting. And when you stop expecting, you stop hurting. And when you stop hurting, you start thinking. And I was thinking very clearly. 2 days later, he confronted me. And you already know how that went. The humiliation didn't begin with words. It began the day he took my seat and told me to move. It was subtle. That's how he did everything. Quiet, casual, confident. He was sitting in my chair, the one by the window, the one I'd used for years, the one she had placed there for me. He didn't look up when I entered, didn't acknowledge, didn't react. He just stretched his legs and said, "You can sit somewhere else." No tone, no aggression, just authority. I stood there, not frozen, not confused, studying. She was in the kitchen. I looked at her. She glanced over, saw it, said nothing. That was the moment, the first public claim. And she let him make it. I nodded, moved, not because I accepted, because I noted. And he smiled, not wide, satisfied. That smile told me everything. From that day, he became bolder. He didn't knock. He didn't ask. He didn't wait. He entered rooms like he owned them. He corrected me, dismissed me, ignored me. In front of her. Always in front of her. Because humiliation is most powerful when witnessed. And she witnessed everything. Without interruption. Without resistance. Without loyalty. He began giving instructions. Not suggestions. Commands. Turn that down. Don't park there. Move your things. And every time, he'd look at her. Not me. As if waiting for approval. She gave it. With silence. With nods. With inaction. And that gave him power. Because power is not taken. It is allowed. He started calling me by my first name. Not out of familiarity. Out of disrespect. Dropped the title. Dropped the tone. Dropped the boundary. And she didn't correct him. She didn't even notice. Or pretended not to. And I understood something very important. She was choosing comfort over courage. And he was exploiting it. One afternoon, he said to her, "Why is he still here?" Not quietly. Not privately. In front of me. Like I wasn't present. She froze. Looked at me. Then looked away. And said, "It's complicated." He laughed. "That's not an answer." She didn't reply. And I didn't either. Because men who argue in moments like that lose dignity. And I was not losing mine. He started inviting people over more often. Louder. Later. Careless. Music shaking walls. Laughter spilling through rooms. I'd walk through and they'd go quiet. He wouldn't introduce me. Wouldn't acknowledge me. I was invisible. And invisibility is a weapon. When it's forced. One of his friends asked, "Who's that?" He shrugged. "Just someone who lives here." Just someone. Not husband. Not family. Not partner. Just someone. And she heard it. She was standing right there. She smiled. Nervously. Didn't correct him. Didn't clarify. Didn't defend. And I felt something shift. Not anger. Not sadness. Detachment. Because once respect is gone, so is attachment. And I detached. Quietly. Completely. He began interfering in my conversations with her. Interrupting. Redirecting. Ending them. If I spoke, he cut in. If I joked, he corrected. If I planned, he replaced. And she followed him. Every time. Because following him was easier than confronting him. And she always chose easy. He started controlling the thermostat, the lights, the doors, small things. But control is built from small things. He turned off what I turned on, moved what I placed, rearranged what I organized. And when I asked why, he said, "Because I wanted to." That was it. No explanation, no justification, just desire. And she backed him, with silence. Again. One evening, I was watching television. He walked in, picked up the remote, changed the channel, didn't look at me, didn't ask, just did it. I waited. She was in the kitchen. She glanced over, saw it, said nothing. And that was the first time I felt something cold. Not in my chest, in my focus. Because that was dominance. Clear, open, unchallenged. And he was enjoying it. He began speaking to me through her. Not directly. Tell him to. Ask him if. Let him know. Like I wasn't capable of hearing. Like I wasn't present. Like I wasn't equal. And she played along. Delivered messages. Softened tone. Protected him. Not me. Never me. He started criticizing my routines. Why do you wake up so early? Why do you eat like that? Why do you dress like this? Always with a laugh. Always with a smirk. Always with her nearby. And she'd smile. Sometimes laugh. Never stop him. Never defend me. And that was worse than the words. Because words can be ignored. Silence can't. He tested boundaries. Used my car without asking. Used my tools without returning. Entered my room without knocking. And I let him. Because each violation was proof. And I was collecting proof. Not for confrontation. For strategy. Because men like him don't respond to emotion. They respond to loss. And I was preparing him for loss. Quietly. Patiently. Precisely. One night, he said something that told me he felt untouchable. "You know," he said, leaning back, "this house would be a lot more peaceful without you." She stiffened. Not in defense. In fear. Fear of him. Not fear for me. And that told me everything. She was afraid of upsetting him. Not of losing me. And that is the exact moment a marriage ends. Not on paper. In reality. I looked at him. Long. And said, "Peace doesn't come from removal. It comes from respect." He laughed. She said nothing. And that was the end of that. Because when wisdom meets entitlement, wisdom steps back and lets entitlement fall. He began isolating her from me completely. Whispering. Redirecting. Occupying. He sat closer. Spoke softer. Controlled conversations. And I was pushed out. Not physically. Emotionally. And that's more painful. Because physical distance can be closed. Emotional distance is intentional. He was preparing her. Conditioning her. Training her to see me as the problem. The obstacle. The interference. And she was accepting it. Because it was easier than facing him. And easier always feels safer. Until it isn't. I stopped trying. Not out of defeat. Out of calculation. Because every time I stayed calm, he grew more careless. And careless men reveal everything. And he was revealing a lot. He began leaving notes. On my things. On my space. Move this. Don't touch that. Not yours. Not signed. Not discussed. Just placed. Like markers. Like claims. Like territory. And I removed them. Quietly. Without comment. And he noticed. Because he wanted reaction. And I denied him that. He grew irritated. restless, sharper. Because when manipulation fails, it escalates. And he was escalating. Subtly. But I saw it. Every time. One evening, he blocked my path in the hallway. Not aggressively. Casually. I stopped. He didn't move. I waited. He smiled. Slow. And said, "You should get used to stepping aside." I held his gaze. Didn't blink. Didn't move. Didn't speak. He tilted his head. Smirked. And stepped aside. But the message was delivered. And I received it. Clearly. That was when I knew. The threat was coming. Not because of anger. Because of confidence. And confidence is dangerous in spoiled men. Because it makes them reckless. And reckless men make mistakes. And I was waiting for his. The danger wasn't that he hated me. It was that he no longer felt he needed to hide it. He stopped pretending. That's always the turning point. When a manipulative person drops the mask, it means they believe they've already won. He walked heavier. Spoke louder. Claimed more. He didn't wait for space. He took it. If I was standing somewhere, he'd move in. If I was speaking, he'd interrupt. If I was resting, he'd disturb. Not aggressively. Deliberately. Because disruption is power. And he was building power. Right in front of me. He began using sarcasm as a weapon. "Wow, still here. Didn't know you were home. Thought you'd finally moved out." Always with a laugh. Always with her nearby. And she would smile. Weakly. Uncomfortably. But never defensively. And he noticed. Because he was always watching her. Always measuring her reactions. Always checking his control. And every time she didn't defend me, he gained ground. He started creating situations. Small traps. He'd move my things and deny it. Change settings and blame me. Use my belongings and accuse me. And she would look at me. Questioning. Not him. And that was intentional. Because he was planting doubt. In her. About me. And it was working. I could see it. In her eyes. In her tone. In her hesitation. She was starting to see me as the problem. Not him. And that's how manipulation succeeds. It doesn't attack the target. It poisons the witness. He whispered to her more. Longer. Lower. And when I entered a room, conversations would stop. Not awkwardly. Strategically. Like they had agreed. And I was not part of that agreement. I was excluded. Not accidentally. Intentionally. And that's when isolation becomes real. Not when you are alone. When you are made alone. He began criticizing my contributions. He doesn't do much. He doesn't help. He doesn't care. All lies. All delivered softly. All absorbed easily. Because lies spoken calmly feel like truth. And she absorbed them. Slowly. Quietly. Completely. I didn't defend. Because defending against lies only validates them. I let them stand. Because I knew something he didn't. Lies need maintenance. Truth does not. And I was patient. He grew more comfortable challenging me. Openly. In front of her. In front of others. Why are you even here? What do you actually contribute? Do you even belong? Not aggressive. Curious. Like he was genuinely asking. And she would freeze. Look away. Or pretend not to hear. And every time she did that, he grew taller. Not physically. Psychologically. Because unchallenged disrespect becomes authority. And he was building authority. Brick by brick. He started using her emotions against her. If she hesitated, he'd sigh. If she questioned, he'd withdraw. If she resisted, he'd accuse. You don't love me. You always choose him. I'm always second. And she would panic. Reassure. Apologize. Not to me. To him. And I watched. Not in anger. In understanding. Because she wasn't choosing him over me. She was choosing peace over conflict. And men like him thrive on that. They create conflict to become the solution. And he was very good at it. He began scheduling things over my plans. Events. Dinners. Outings. Always last minute. Always urgent. And she would cancel. With me. For him. And that's when I stopped inviting. Because rejection hurts less when you expect it. And I expected it. Every time. He started mocking my routines. My quiet. My calm. My habits. Do you ever do anything? Are you always this boring? Don't you get tired of being you? And she would smile. Not because it was funny. Because it was easier. Easier than correcting him. Easier than confronting him. Easier than choosing me. And I saw that. Very clearly. He tested boundaries more aggressively. Blocked doorways. Occupied spaces. Interrupted moments. Not violently. Deliberately. Because he wanted to see how far he could go. And I let him go far. Because I wanted him comfortable. Overconfident. Careless. Because careless men make mistakes. And I was waiting. One evening, he said something that changed the tone. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just precise. This isn't your family. She froze. He looked at her. She didn't correct him. Didn't disagree. Didn't object. She looked down. And that silence was an answer. And I received it. Fully. Completely. Calmly. From that point, he stopped pretending I existed. He spoke around me. Walked past me. Ignored me. Like air. Like furniture. Like nothing. And that kind of erasure is intentional. It's meant to break you. To make you disappear before you leave. And it almost worked. Almost. He began making future plans. In front of me. Without me. We'll do this. We'll go there. We'll change that. Always, we. Never including me. And she followed. Because she had already chosen. She just hadn't admitted it yet. He started controlling her opinions. If she agreed with me, he frowned. If she supported me, he withdrew. If she defended me, he sulked. And she adjusted. Every time. Because she was afraid of losing him. Not of losing me. And fear determines loyalty. Always. I watched the transformation. A woman who once leaned on me now leaned away. A partner who once confided now concealed. A wife who once shared now separated. And I didn't chase. Because men who chase lose power. And I was not losing power. I was gathering it. Quietly. He grew more direct. You should leave. This isn't working. You're not wanted. Not shouted. Not threatened. Stated. Like facts. And she didn't stop him. Didn't defend me. Didn't challenge him. And that told me the truth. The threat was coming. Not because he was angry. Because he was confident. And confident men don't ask. They demand. He started standing closer. Invading space. Staring longer. Testing limits. And I held my ground. Unmoving. Silent. Because silence unsettles aggressive people. And he was unsettled. I could see it. In his jaw. In his eyes. In his breath. He expected fear. Not calm. And calm confused him. He whispered one night as he passed me. You're temporary. I didn't respond. Didn't react. Didn't acknowledge. Because men like him need validation. Even negative. And I gave him none. And that bothered him. Deeply. He began escalating. Small confrontations. Sharp comments. deliberate disrespect. And she remained neutral, which was not neutral at all, because neutrality in injustice is alignment. And she was aligned with him. He started telling her what to say, how to say it, when to say it, and she followed, because she was already conditioned. And conditioning is powerful. It replaces thinking with obedience. And I was watching it happen in real time. He became impatient, restless, sharper, because manipulation takes effort, and he was tired of effort. He wanted results. And that's when men like him make mistakes, because impatience reveals intent, and his intent was becoming visible. One night, he stood in the doorway of the bedroom, not blocking, hovering, watching. I looked up, met his eyes. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared, and I understood. That was a warning, not a threat. A warning, and I received it. I didn't sleep much that night, not from fear, from clarity, because when someone warns you without words, they are already planning, and I knew. Something was coming, something direct, something final, and I was ready. The pressure didn't explode, it closed in slowly, like a door being locked while you're still inside. He began controlling the timing of everything. Meals, conversations, movements. If I entered the kitchen, he'd leave. If I sat down, he'd stand up. If I spoke, he'd turn away. Not out of avoidance, out of dominance. Because dominance isn't about presence. It's about absence, making someone feel unnecessary. And he was very good at that. He started rearranging schedules. Her schedule, not his. Hers. Come with me. Don't go. Cancel that. And she did. Every time. Without discussion. Without hesitation. Without consulting me. And I realized something uncomfortable. He wasn't asking her. He was instructing her. And she was obeying. Because he had trained her to. He started creating tension on purpose. If things were calm, he'd disrupt them. A comment, a look, a complaint. Because peace makes manipulators nervous. They need chaos to feel relevant. And he was always relevant. Always present. Always demanding. And she was always responding. To him. Not me. He began criticizing my presence. Not directly. Indirectly. He's always around. He never gives space. It feels crowded. I heard it. From the hallway. She replied. It's his home too. He paused. Then said. Is it? And she didn't answer. That silence. That silence was loud. And I heard it clearly. He started pushing boundaries physically. Not touching. Positioning. Standing too close. Blocking paths. Entering rooms. Claiming space. And I allowed it. Because when someone is testing territory, you let them mark it, so you can see where they think it is. And he marked everything. Everywhere. He began speaking about the future. Openly. Without me. We should change the house. We should remodel. We should move. Always, we. Never including me. And she nodded. Agreed. Followed. And I realized something painful. He wasn't trying to remove me. He was replacing me. And replacement is more dangerous than removal. Because it requires loyalty. And he had hers. He started positioning himself as her protector. Don't stress. I'll handle it. You don't need him. And she leaned. Not on me. On him. And I felt the shift. Not emotionally. Strategically. Because when a man replaces you in your own home, he's not sharing. He's taking. And I was letting him. Because takers get careless. And careless men expose everything. He started challenging me openly. Small confrontations, sharp remarks, public corrections. And I stayed calm, always calm. And that bothered him. Because manipulators need reaction. They need emotion. They need chaos. And I gave him none. And that made him uneasy. Because he couldn't read me. And men like him fear what they can't read. He began accusing me of things. She seems unhappy. You make things tense. You bring negative energy. All lies. All strategic. All designed to isolate. And she started absorbing them. I could see it. In her eyes. In her tone. In her distance. She was beginning to associate discomfort with me, not him. And that is exactly how manipulation works. You attach negativity to the target, and the mind does the rest. He created small conflicts between us. Miscommunications. Misunderstandings. Misquotes. He'd say I said something I didn't. He'd claim I did something I hadn't. He'd twist moments. And she believed him. Because he was emotional. And I was calm. And in her mind, emotion meant truth. And calm meant indifference. She was wrong. But she didn't know it. He started controlling the narrative. Telling her what I felt. What I meant. What I intended. And she accepted. Because it was easier than asking me. And that's when I stopped explaining. Because men who explain to people who don't listen lose respect. And I wasn't losing anymore. He began setting rules. Not formally. Casually. Don't do that. That's not allowed. We don't do that here. Always we. And she followed. Because he had positioned himself as authority. And she had accepted it. Because authority feels safe when you're afraid. And she was afraid. Of losing him. Not of losing me. He started entering my personal space deliberately. Standing too close. Leaning in. Staring. Not threatening. Testing. And I met his gaze. Every time. Without flinching. Without speaking. And he noticed. Because confidence disrupts dominance. And he didn't like that. He began making comments about my age. My habits. My pace. Maybe you should slow down. Maybe it's time to move on. Maybe you're past your time. Not cruel. Calculated. Because he was building a case. Not for me. For her. And she was listening. Absorbing. Agreeing. Slowly. Quietly. Completely. He started talking about space. Privacy. Boundaries. All in relation to me. Never him. And she echoed it. Used his words. Repeated his phrases. And I knew. He was scripting her. And she was reading the script. Perfectly. One night, she asked me, "Do you ever think about leaving?" Not emotionally. Not softly. Practically. Like a suggestion. I looked at her. Long. And said, "I think about clarity." She didn't understand. And I didn't explain. Because explanations are for people who care. And she was past that. He grew bolder. Sharper. More direct. Because he sensed the shift. He knew he had her. And when manipulators secure loyalty, they stop pretending. And he stopped. He began issuing quiet ultimatums. Not to me. To her. If he stays, I go. I can't live like this. It's him or me. And she panicked. Reassured. Apologized. Not to me. To him. And I saw it. In her eyes. In her body. In her fear. She was afraid of losing him. And that fear was guiding her. Not love. Not reason. Fear. He started standing in doorways. Blocking paths. Occupying space. Not aggressively. Strategically. Like a man testing his strength. And I let him. Because strength without wisdom is dangerous. and he had no wisdom. Only entitlement. He began making future plans again. Louder. Clearer. We'll have the place to ourselves. We'll finally have peace. We won't have to deal with him. Not whispered. Not hidden. Said. Openly. And she didn't stop him. Didn't correct him. Didn't defend me. And that was the confirmation. She had already decided. She just hadn't said it yet. He started preparing the environment. Moving things. Clearing spaces. Making room. Not for me. For my absence. And I watched. Not in anger. In precision. Because preparation reveals intention. And his intention was very clear. He became impatient. Because manipulation takes time. And he wanted results. And impatience is dangerous. Because impatient men rush. And rushing men make mistakes. And I was waiting. He began pushing me verbally. Testing. Provoking. Trying to get a reaction. And I gave him none. And that frustrated him. Because he wanted conflict. He wanted explosion. He wanted justification. And I was denying him all of it. One night, he stood in front of me. Close. Too close. And said quietly, "You're in the way." I didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't blink. He smiled. But his eyes were hard. And I understood. That wasn't a comment. It was a declaration. I nodded. Not in agreement. In acknowledgement. Because when someone declares intent, you take it seriously. And I did. I went to bed that night. Focused. Clear. Because the moment was near. Not because I feared it. Because I expected it. And expectation removes shock. And shock is what weakens people. And I was not weak. 2 days later, he confronted me. And that is where everything changed. The threat wasn't loud. It was calm, precise, and delivered like a verdict. He didn't shout. That's what surprised me. He stood there. Straight. Eyes steady. And said, "You need to leave." Not emotional. Not angry. Certain. Like he had already decided. I looked at him. Then at her. She was standing behind him. Close. Too close. I waited. She didn't speak. That was the confirmation. He continued. "You're not wanted here anymore. This isn't working. It's time. No insults. No explanation. Just removal." I didn't respond immediately. Not because I was shocked. Because I was measuring. His posture. Her silence. The space between them. It told me everything. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. He took a step closer. Invaded my space. Lowered his voice. "So let's not make this messy." There it was. The pressure. The implied threat. I turned slightly toward her. Looked at her. Really looked. Her eyes dropped. She said nothing. Not a word. Not a defense. Not a question. And that was the second verdict. I spoke calmly. "This is my home." He smiled. "That's where you're wrong." And she didn't correct him. Didn't interrupt. Didn't object. She just stood there. And in that moment, I felt something strange. Not pain. Not anger. Relief. Because uncertainty ended. And clarity arrived. And clarity is powerful. He crossed his arms. Relaxed. Confident. Like a man who believes he's already won. "You've had your time," he said. "Now it's ours." Ours. He said it naturally. Comfortably. And she didn't resist. She didn't pull away. She didn't step back. She leaned. Slightly. Toward him. And that small movement said more than words ever could. I nodded. Slowly. He watched closely. probably expecting resistance, argument, emotion. I gave him none, and that unsettled him, because manipulators need reaction. They need chaos. They need drama, and I was denying him all of it. He narrowed his eyes. "You're not hearing me," he said. "You don't have a choice." There it was. The line. The one he'd been building toward. The one he felt entitled to use. And she didn't stop him. Didn't correct him. Didn't say my name. Didn't move. And that was the third verdict. I smiled. Not wide. Not warm. Controlled. He paused. Confused. Because smiles don't belong in moments like that. And he didn't understand it. And that made him uncomfortable. He leaned in. Closer. Lowered his voice. "If you don't leave, I will make things very difficult for you." Not shouted. Not threatened. Promised. And I believed him. Because men like him don't bluff. They calculate. And he had calculated. He believed he had her. And he was right. I turned to her. She finally spoke. Soft. Careful. Maybe it's best if you give him space. Face. That word. So gentle. So cruel. So final. I nodded again. Still calm. Still steady. And that confused both of them. Because they expected pleading. Defensiveness. Negotiation. And I gave them nothing. He relaxed. Smiled. He thought he'd won. And that was exactly what I wanted him to think. Because confident men get careless. And careless men reveal everything. And I was waiting for him to reveal. He stepped back. Gestured toward the door. "So, when can you be out?" I didn't answer immediately. I walked to the table. Picked up my keys. Slow. Deliberate. I could feel their eyes on me. Watching. Waiting. He thought I was leaving. She thought I was complying. They were both wrong. I turned. Looked at him. Then at her. And said calmly, "I'll need some time." He nodded. Satisfied. She exhaled. Relieved. And that told me everything. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about comfort. And I was no longer providing it. He smirked. "Don't take too long." I smiled again. Small. Controlled. And said, "I won't." And I meant it. Just not the way he thought. I walked out of the room. Not the house. The room. Because I wasn't leaving yet. I was repositioning. And they didn't notice. Because people who think they've won stop watching. And I wanted them to stop watching. In the bedroom, I sat down. Not to cry. Not to panic. To plan. Because that threat, that wasn't the end. That was the beginning. I took a breath. Slow. Steady. And thought, so this is how you want to play. Quiet. Clean. Controlled. Good. Because that's exactly how I play too. I heard him laughing in the living room. Relieved. Relaxed. Already celebrating. And that made me smile. Because celebrations before outcomes are dangerous. And he was celebrating early. She came in later. Stood in the doorway. Didn't enter. Didn't sit. Just hovered. And said, "He's under a lot of stress." I looked at her. Come. And said, "So am I." She didn't reply. Because she didn't know what to say. Because there was nothing left to say. She left. I remained. And in that silence, I made a decision. Not emotional. Not impulsive. Strategic. Final. I would not fight. I would not argue. I would not beg. I would not confront. Because confrontation feeds men like him. And I wasn't feeding him. I was starving him. Slowly. Quietly. Completely. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because things were good. because things were clear. And clarity brings peace, even when the truth is ugly. In the morning, he acted normal, casual, relaxed, confident, like a man who believes the problem is solved. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge me, because he believed I was temporary. And temporary things don't need attention. And that was his mistake. I made coffee. He didn't comment. She watched, nervous. I smiled. Not at them. At the situation. Because now the game was open. And I was very good at games. He walked past me. Shoulder close. Deliberate. Testing. I didn't move. Didn't react. And he noticed. Because men who dominate expect submission. And I was not submitting. And that unsettled him. He looked back. Narrowed his eyes. And said, "You're still here." I met his gaze. "Come." And said, "For now." And that was the first time I saw it. Uncertainty. Just a flicker. In his eyes. And I knew. The balance was shifting. He started testing more after that. Small things at first. Moving my things without asking. Sitting in my seat. Using my mug. Territory games. He wanted to see if I would react. I didn't. And that bothered him more than anger ever could. Because silence removes feedback. And men like him live on feedback. One morning, I found my documents stacked differently. Neater. Too neat. He had gone through them. I didn't mention it. Just moved them back. Slowly. Deliberately. And left them exactly where they were before. He noticed. I saw it in his eyes. That flicker again. Because he wanted to assert control. And I had quietly reclaimed it. At breakfast, he spoke over me. Interrupted. Corrected me. In front of her. She laughed nervously. Didn't defend. Didn't support. I kept eating. Didn't engage. And the table felt heavy. Because dominance needs opposition. And I wasn't giving him any. He leaned back in his chair. Smiled. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" I looked at him. "Come." And said, "Not yet." And his smile tightened. Just slightly. Because the timeline he had imagined was not obeying him. And manipulators hate delays. Later, I overheard them whispering. Low. Urgent. Planning. I didn't interrupt. Didn't eavesdrop. Didn't pretend. I let them think I wasn't listening. Because people reveal more when they think they're unheard. He started being charming around others. Loud laughter. Big smiles. Public kindness. Private coldness. A classic contrast. Designed to make me look difficult. To make himself look reasonable. And I watched it. Calmly. Without comment. Because patterns become evidence. And evidence is powerful. One evening, he brought guests without asking. Filled the space. Changed the energy. Crowded me out. She busied herself hosting. Didn't check on me. Didn't look for me. I stayed in my seat. Present. Silent. Unmovable. And he noticed. Because he wanted me invisible. And I refused to disappear. He joked about me. Lightly. Just enough to sting. Not enough to confront. The room laughed. She smiled awkwardly. I didn't react. And that confused him. Because jokes are hooks. And I wasn't biting. He tried again. A little sharper. A little louder. I met his eyes. Held them. Come. Steady. And he looked away. First. Because confidence collapses under steady attention. And he wasn't as confident as he pretended. After they left, she came to me. Soft voice. Careful tone. He didn't mean anything by it. I looked at her. And said, "Neither did I." And walked away. And she stood there. Confused. Because she wanted explanation. Justification. emotion. And I gave her none. That night, he raised his voice. Not at me. Near me. Slamming a door. Dropping something. Noise tactics. Designed to intimidate. I didn't flinch. Didn't look. Didn't move. And he noticed. Because fear is currency to men like him. And I was bankrupting him. He confronted me in the hallway. Blocked my path. Close. Too close. You think you're smart, he said. I looked up at him. Come. And said, I know I am. And that landed harder than anger ever could. Because arrogance doesn't expect certainty. And he wasn't ready for mine. He laughed. Short, sharp, careful. I smiled. Small, controlled. And said, I am. And stepped around him. And he didn't stop me. Because bullies retreat when challenged quietly. They don't know how to fight calm. She watched from the doorway. Silent. Torn. I didn't look at her. Because I already knew her choice. And I was no longer waiting for it. The next day, he accidentally used something important of mine. Left it damaged. Unusable. No apology. Just a shrug. I nodded. Said nothing. And wrote it down. Not on paper. In memory. Because patterns matter. And I was collecting. He started telling her stories. About me. Quiet. Selective. Reframed. I saw it in her eyes. The shift. The doubt. The distance. And I didn't correct it. Because truth doesn't rush. It waits. And reveals itself when lies get heavy. He tried one last time to provoke. Cornered me. Lowered his voice. You don't belong here. I looked at him. Come. And said, neither do you. And walked away. And I heard his breath change. Sharper. Because that landed. And he knew it. That night, I packed nothing. Moved nothing. Changed nothing. Because movement signals weakness. And I was not weak. I was patient. I lay in bed. Listened to them laugh. Whisper. Plan. And I smiled. Because every plan has blind spots. And I was standing in theirs. In the morning, she avoided me. Couldn't meet my eyes. Because guilt avoids witnesses. And I was a living witness. He was confident again. Too confident. Overplayed. And that told me something important. He thought the end was close. And men who think the end is close stop being careful. He left his phone on the table. Unlocked. Face up. And didn't notice. Because arrogance creates carelessness. And carelessness creates opportunity. And opportunity is where quiet revenge is born. I didn't touch it. Didn't look. Didn't move. Because the trap was not for me. It was for him. And he had just set it himself. I picked up my bag. Went out. Not leaving. Positioning. Because the next move wouldn't be emotional. It would be precise. I paused at the door. He didn't notice. She didn't look. And I thought, good. Let them underestimate. It makes everything easier. I stepped out. Closed the door. Slow. Quiet. And the game moved to the next phase. I didn't rush. That's the mistake most people make. They feel the tension and think speed is power. It isn't. Timing is. And timing favors the patient. I went to the place I had avoided for years. Not because I feared it. Because I didn't need it. The storage unit. The one with the old files. The ones from before her. Before him. Before this house. Before I became convenient. I unlocked it. Dust. Silence. Memory. And clarity. I found the folder. Thick. Neat. Unlabeled. The kind that doesn't draw attention. The kind you keep when you know people change. And people always do. I sat on the floor. Opened it. And smiled. Because I had forgotten how thorough I used to be. Bank records, property transfers, signed agreements, messages, receipts, not secrets, patterns. And patterns don't lie. I remembered her voice. Years ago. Soft. Grateful. You're saving us. And now. She was protecting him. And he was threatening me. Funny how that works. I didn't feel angry. I felt prepared. There's a difference. Anger is noise. Preparation is control. And control is quiet. I took pictures. Not everything. Just enough. Because overexposure weakens impact. And I wanted impact. Clean. Undeniable. I drove back slowly, letting the silence settle. Because when you act from silence, you don't make mistakes. The house was loud when I returned. Music. Laughter. Energy. His energy. He was celebrating something. I didn't ask what. Because I already knew. He thought he was winning. She was in the kitchen. Back turned. Busy. Avoiding. I didn't speak. I washed my hands. Normal. And she flinched. Just slightly. Because guilt hears footsteps louder. He came in. Saw me. Stopped. Smiled. Too wide. Too forced. How was your day? I looked at him, and said, productive. And he nodded, but his eyes narrowed, because he heard something he didn't like. They sat together, close, unified, the picture they wanted me to see, the message they wanted me to feel. I sat across, unmoved, and the balance shifted, because presence changes dynamics, and I was very present. He started talking about the future, plans, renovations, changes, all involving the house, none involving me. And I listened, because people reveal intent when they feel safe. And he felt safe. She laughed, agreed, added details, looked at him with pride, didn't look at me, and I let it happen, because denial is a powerful teacher. And lessons stick better when they hurt. He leaned back, relaxed, confident. Big changes coming, he said. I smiled, small, and said, yes, they are. And he paused, just a second, because he felt it, even if he didn't understand it. That night, he went out. She stayed in, quiet, restless. I sat in the living room. Reading, not watching, not waiting, just being. And that unsettled her. Because people sense stability, and it makes them question themselves. She finally spoke. You've been distant. I looked up, and said, no, I've been clear. And she didn't know what to say. Because clarity removes confusion. And she wanted confusion. She tried another angle. He's just finding his way. I nodded. And so am I. And she blinked. Because she hadn't considered that. She sat. Fidgeted. Looked at her hands. I don't want problems. I looked at her. Steady. And said, neither do I. And the space between us felt heavy. Because we both knew one of us was lying. He came back late, smelled of confidence, of victory, of someone who thinks control is permanent. He didn't even look at me, which told me everything. The next morning, I left early, not because I had to, because I wanted him to relax, because relaxed people slip, and I needed him to slip. By noon, I had what I needed, not from him, from his pattern. From his arrogance, from his need to be seen, from his belief that he was untouchable. I didn't confront, didn't accuse, didn't warn, because warnings are gifts. And I wasn't feeling generous. When I returned, the house was quiet. Too quiet. She was in the bedroom. Door closed. He wasn't home. And the air felt different, tense, like something had shifted. And it had. She came out, eyes red, voice tight. "We need to talk." I nodded. "Of course." And sat. "Come. Open. Ready." And she hesitated, because she didn't expect readiness. She expected resistance. She sat across from me, hands clasped. "He's been under pressure," she said. I listened, because people confess through justification. "He feels like you don't accept him." I nodded. Feelings can be heavy. And she swallowed, because that wasn't the reaction she wanted. "He thinks you judge him." I looked at her, and said, "I observe him." And she looked away, because observation is harder to argue with. She took a breath. "He says you're planning something." I smiled, small, and said, "We all are." And her eyes widened, because she heard the truth. And it scared her.